Okay, I just want to welcome everyone here. We'll begin. And seems like there's something wrong with the speech. It's like reverberating. But let me start off by saying my name is Michael Moresco, and I'm the town administrator for the town of Marshfield. And we're being joined by my counterpart in Duxbury, Rainey Reed. I want to start off by giving special thanks to the Woods Hole Group. This is a very important discussion that we're going to be having today on resiliency and beach nourishment. You'll hear from the professionals. I'm certainly not a professional, but being the town administrator of a coastal community, our beaches are a huge resource for tourism, a huge resource for tax revenue, and it's imperative that we aggressively do whatever necessary to make sure that we protect our beaches. And today we're going to hear from the experts, the Woods Hole Group, Leslie Fields, on alternatives, resiliency alternatives that we need to take a serious look at. You know, Marshfield, we're rebuilding jetties. We're working with the federal government, beach nourishment, looking to use dredge spoils, revetment, seawall repairs with our DPW, and we're joined by Rod Procaccino, one of our great engineers. We've done incredible seawall repair, rebuild down in Brant Rock. They're bigger and taller, so the residents that are right on the seawall feel safer, and they do a much better job of keeping the high tide and the splash over better than the existing seawalls. We've got to protect our dunes, a lot of our school groups, and we've got to get more of our residents out on planting seagrass to protect those dunes. All of these things, easements is another really important thing in order to get on and do seawall repair, rebuild, and beach nourishment. We need the cooperation of our citizens. So I'm hoping that people that are listening to the true professionals that are on here from the Woods Hole Group, and they hear the experiences and they hear the various engagement that the cities and towns need to take to the coastal communities, that will be able to work well to make sure that we are doing beach nourishment, protecting our seawalls and our communities, and our most valuable resource, that is our beaches for tourism. Thank you, and I hope everyone enjoys this program.
Thanks, Mike. Rainey, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I'm happy to be here, and thank you for organizing. I do appreciate it. It'll be extremely helpful, I'm sure.
Okay. Well, with that, I'd like to introduce Leslie Fields. She's our project coordinator working at Woods Hole Group and doing a lot of research for the two towns through a grant from the Coastal Zone Resiliency Program. And we're very happy to have Leslie here to share some of her initial findings and tell us all more about what we're going to be looking at in the long run for the shoreline.
Okay, thanks. We'll go ahead and get started. Thanks very much for the introduction from Valerie and Michael. My name is Leslie Fields, and I work at the Woods Hole Group. And we are the consulting firm that's working with the towns of Marshfield and Duxbury on this project, the title of which is the Planning, Design, Permitting, and Public Education for Beach Nourishment at Critically Eroded Beaches in Marshfield and Duxbury. I'm going to walk you through a series of about 30 slides that describe the project, why the towns need to build shoreline resiliency, and then describe some of the work that we've done to identify alternatives for building that resiliency and what our next steps are for moving forward in this project. The project is being funded through a CZM Coastal Resilience Grant. Ordinarily, we would be bringing this meeting to you for a face-to-face in a public forum, but given the current situation with the coronavirus, we're having this virtual meeting. But I do want to let everyone know that we are accepting and want to get questions and comments on this project. So these questions and comments can be sent to the two email websites you see here on the screen. Greg Guimond, the Marshfield Town Planner, and Valerie Massard, the Duxbury Town Planner. The graphic on the left is a series of locations where CZM has or is currently funding projects related to building coastal resiliency throughout the Commonwealth. So the goals of the project are to explore ways to incorporate more resilient strategies for shore protection that will supplement the town's existing approaches to shoreline management. As I said a second ago, the project is funded by a CZM Coastal Resiliency Grant. The total cost of the project is $234,546. The town's received a grant from CZM for $175,842, and they're providing $58,704 worth of cash and in-kind services to get the work done. The towns were awarded the grant in September of 2019, and the study is due for completion on June 30th, 2020. Both towns are, as everyone listening I'm sure knows, they're vibrant coastal communities. They have year-round and seasonal residents. I think the population of Marshfield is a little over 25,000 and Duxbury about 15,500. But the population of both towns grow by about 30%, 38% in the summer months. The photo in the upper right is an aerial photo of the town of Marshfield with Green Harbor in the front and then looking north up along the shoreline. The photo in the left is another aerial photo of the town of Duxbury shoreline that's included in this study. So that's the section of beach that's along Gurnet Road in Duxbury. So this slide here just describes some of the coastline characteristics. Both coastlines have a set of barrier beaches that are interspersed with coastal headlands. So the barrier beaches are shown in these little black hatched areas on this graphic. And then they're interspersed with headlands in between. The barrier beaches are thin strips of land that are backed by estuaries or riverine, coastal riverine systems. The development in both towns is primarily single-family residences, although there is some commercial development in the town of Marshfield. One thing I wanted to note is that in Duxbury, this particular project just focuses on the developed portion of Duxbury, so it's the northern portion of the Duxbury shoreline. The southern portion of the Duxbury shoreline within the Duxbury Beach Reservation is natural and undeveloped. CZM has funded a number of coastal resiliency grant projects for Duxbury Beach Reservation. So this work that we are doing for the towns and that's funded by CZM is really part of a larger sort of program to look at building resiliency along the entire Marshfield and Duxbury coastline. Okay, in terms of armoring, coastal armoring in these two towns, both towns have a significant amount of coastal armoring in them. And that's shown by these red lines in this left graphic here. So within the town of Marshfield, 83% of the shoreline is armored. And within Duxbury, the northern portion of Duxbury that we're studying as a part of this project, 91% of that shoreline is armored. The photographs on the right-hand upper left or upper right photo is of the beach at the end of Monitor Road in the Fieldston Beach area. You can see the seawall in that area. The middle photograph is the beach at Brighton Street in the Bay Ave area, south of Green Harbor in Marshfield. So that's a seawall with toe stones in front of it. And then the photo in the bottom is a photo of the beach and seawalls that were damaged during, I believe, the March 2018 storm. And that's in the area of Duxbury along Gurnet Road. So this slide here just illustrates some of the impacts of coastal armoring. There's obviously clear benefits of coastal armoring, and that the walls act as the last line of defense for erosion. So the seawall, the beach can erode back to the seawall, but once it hits that seawall, it can't go any further, and the properties behind are obviously protected from any further erosion. But there's also disadvantages associated with coastal armoring, namely that it adversely impacts the beach in front of the wall. So the schematic down below just shows the difference in how a natural beach responds to coastal processes on the left, and how a beach that's armored with a seawall or revetment responds to coastal processes. So on the left, under natural conditions, during storms and wave events, we can get erosion, typically get erosion of the dune area right here, and the beach will migrate landward into that dune area. But importantly, the width of the beach is maintained. On the right-hand side with the seawalls, you start out with a nice beach width, but over time, that beach width decreases and the elevation of the beach drops. And that's what's shown in this schematic here. So just continuing with the impacts of coastal armoring, once you get that lower beach elevation, then the water during storms is deeper. And once you get deeper water during storms, that allows larger waves to impact the seawalls. With larger waves, there's more overtopping. As you can see in this photograph in the Brant rock area in the lower left, that's some overtopping during the March 2018 storm, the Brant rock area. And once you get that overtopping, with more and more overtopping, you get increased damages to structures behind the wall and to the walls themselves. So as I said, this is a picture of overtopping in the Brant rock area during the March 2018 storm. Also got some other pictures of this one here in the middle is a picture of some damage in the February 2015 storm. And these other pictures on the right are pictures of damage to the seawall during in Duxbury along Gurnet Road. Okay, this is just sort of illustrates some of the history of storm damage in the area. And to get a handle on that, we went back and looked at some of the FEMA flood insurance claims. And in Marshfield and Duxbury, between 1978 and 2017, there's been 24.2 million paid out in flood insurance claims between the two towns. So Marshfield had 18.4 million paid out and Duxbury 5.8 million. We can also look at the number of repetitive loss properties and how those numbers have changed over time. Repetitive loss properties are any property where the National Flood Insurance Program has paid 2 or more flood claims of $1,000 or more in any given 10-year period. So in the town of Marshfield, there were 442 repetitive loss properties as of 2009. And by 2017, there were 629. So that's an increase of 30% in the number of repetitive loss properties. In Duxbury, there were 121 repetitive loss properties as of 2009. And by 2017, 179 for an increase in 32% increase. So the statistics in the table there just go up through 2017. And they don't reflect the damage that we had during the January and March 2018 storms, and it was significant. So between the two towns, the flood insurance claims were over 2.5 million, and there was extensive seawall damage in both towns. So the next two slides really compare the severity of historical storms in terms of two parameters. One is water level or storm surge, and the other is wave height. So we can use statistical analyses and historical data to create recurrence interval curves like you see here on the screen. So this one shows storm return period versus water level or storm surge. So water level is on the y-axis and return period is on the x-axis. And we've displayed some of the recent storms on the curves to show how the water levels have varied and what the associated return periods are. So for example, the March 2018 storm Riley had a water level of about 9.2 feet and was considered a 38-year return period storm in terms of water level. In comparison, the January 2018 storm Grayson had a surge level of 9.6 feet and was considered a 132-year return period storm, again in terms of water level. So Grayson was a storm with an extremely high storm surge, really greater than the storm of record, which is this February 1978 blizzard. It was also a fast-moving storm. And in contrast, Riley, several months later, occurred over several tidal cycles. It was a much longer event. It was more of a wave event than a storm surge event. So I've also shown on this slide the claims that were paid during some of the more recent storms, just to demonstrate that the highest water level doesn't always produce the most damage. So what we can see here is that even though Grayson was a serious event in terms of flooding and storm surge, it was on the lower end in terms of flood insurance claims paid for this area. So then that brings us to, another measure that's typically tracked in order to quantify storm intensity, and that's wave height. So again, this is a return period curve for wave height. We've got wave height on the y-axis and return period on the x-axis. We can see that the October no-name storm from 1991 was about a 30-year storm in terms of wave height, whereas Grayson, the one on the previous slide that had such high storm surge, was only a 2-year event in terms of wave height. In the middle here is Storm Riley, which is about a 10-year storm in terms of wave height. And then if you look at the insurance claim data down the lower right, Riley was at the top of the list in terms of claims paid. So the data show that for this area, the claims track more closely with waves than they do with water level. So even though both processes are important in causing storm damage in the Marshfield and Duxbury area, because the walls are there and there's no beach in front of them, the waves have a more significant effect on storm damage to the properties. And then looking forward and considering the impacts of climate change, we're expecting to see more frequent and larger storms, more intense storms. So this is going to result in more storms sort of towards the upper end of this curve, with resulting more damage along the shoreline to both public and private infrastructure. I wanted to talk a little bit about the current approach for shoreline management that both towns are following. Both towns have very active programs with staff dedicated to maintaining structures along the coastline, ensuring public safety during storms, and planning for future needs. So the current management approach is really aimed at minimizing flooding during storms and reducing wave impacts or wave damages to buildings and public infrastructure like roads and utilities and buildings. So the towns have a history of maintaining and repairing the shore protection structures. And as you heard Michael say at the beginning of the program, also in some cases, raising the elevation or increasing sort of the toe elevation of these structures. They also have a history of helping property owners elevate out of the floodplain or buying out structures. The towns also regulate development in high hazard areas to reduce vulnerability of properties. And they've conducted a number of planning studies through the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program and Coastal Zone Management Resiliency Program, as well as other programs. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about, what are the costs associated with the status quo? What are the costs associated with doing the same thing we've been doing all along for managing the shoreline? So we projected costs over the next 30 years associated with continued maintenance of the seawalls and whatnot. So in Marshfield, we're looking at, over the next 30 years, approximately 1.5 million paid out in repetitive loss claims, and in Duxbury, about 5 million. Seawall repairs are projected to be about 49.5 million over the next 30 years in Marshfield, and about 15.9 million in Duxbury. In terms of storm-related public services, so that's the police, fire, that's providing public safety during the storms, that's cleanup after the storms. Those costs over the next 30 years are estimated to be about 7.3 million in Marshfield and about 5.5 in Duxbury. So all told, over the next 30 years in Marshfield, we're looking at about 71.9 million in expenses, and Duxbury 26.4 million. So in addition to the actual economics associated with this, there's other factors as well. So there'll be continued overtopping and damage to properties. There'll be continued risks to public safety, continued seawall damage. There'll be increased costs to repair, replace, and maintain the walls, as is shown in the table above. There's also the potential for the loss of tax revenue as these properties are damaged and not rebuilt. There's the loss of beach for storm damage protection. There's also the loss of beach for recreation and wildlife habitat, and a likely decline in tourism as the beaches continue to disappear. So knowing the costs associated with the status quo and knowing that we need to adjust to the impacts of climate change, there's a real need to increase the resiliency of the shoreline. And that brings us back to the goal of this project, which is to identify resilient strategies that will improve storm damage protection, reduce damages caused by coastal flooding, reduce wave-induced damages, create resiliency to climate change, and all of these things to augment the current management approach. So we're not suggesting that the towns completely abandon what they're doing currently, but just to augment it with some new, more resilient strategies. So in the next set of slides, I'll be talking about some of the work that we've completed as a part of this project. The first thing we did was to perform an evaluation of the shoreline. So we did a lot of field work to quantify what's out there, and we ended up dividing the shoreline into 14 different areas that are shown in this graphic on the right. Those divisions were based on existing conditions. So we looked at things like, is the beach natural or is it armored? What kind of armoring is there? What's the condition of the beach? Is it wide? Is it narrow? And what's the sediment like on the beach? We ended up with 4 general categories of beaches. There's natural beach and dune areas, and there's only 3 of those. So it's Rexhame Public Beach, Winslow Ave Beach, and then all the way down here, a small section right south of Green Harbor called Green Harbor Beach. As I said before, there's extensive armoring, so place beach areas with seawalls alone, that's Fieldstone and Sunrise, here and here, Hewitt's Point, and Brant Rock as well down here. Seawalls and revetments. The southern end of Sunrise has a combination of seawalls with revetments, so that's a seawall with some toe stones in front of it. The Bay Ave area also has seawalls with revetments, and the Gurnet Road area as well. And there are a few areas with just revetments alone. So whether they're loose stones placed or grouted together, there's the Ocean Bluff beach area and Hewitt's Point have revetments. So the next thing we did was we identified a range of resiliency alternatives that could be considered at each of the different beach areas. This slide shows some of the more traditional nature-based alternatives. So it includes beach nourishment, cobble berm, and dune nourishment. So these alternatives are designed to buffer, to provide a buffer to storm waves, to restore sediment to the system, and that's desperately needed in these two beach communities because the system is basically sediment starved. There's not really much sediment left in the system, so these alternatives would restore sediment to the system. And they are designed to be combined with, in conjunction with the existing coastal armoring. One thing to note is that all of these alternatives require maintenance. They require renourishment. So there's no expectation that we could put in a beach nourishment or a dune nourishment project and leave it and consider that it would, last forever. They are alternatives that require maintenance and renourishment. The picture in the lower left is a picture of a beach and dune nourishment project that Woods Hole Group performed in Cow Bay over on Martha's Vineyard. The picture in the middle here is a cobble berm in Scituate that has been sort of enhanced and renourished with cobble over the years to provide increased resiliency. And the picture in the upper right is a picture of a dune nourishment project that was completed in 2019 at Duxbury Beach Reservation using money from a CZM Coastal Resiliency Grant. So that project has been a great success and provides resiliency not only to the barrier, but to the bay behind and the mainland on the other side of the bay. So we also looked at a series of hybrid alternatives. And the purpose of these hybrid alternatives is to reduce wave energy along the shoreline. They can be conducted either by themselves or combined with other resiliency measures. But they're designed to be flexible and to be adapted over time based on what's going on along the shoreline. So alternatives that we looked at here are offshore reefs, like the picture shown here. Or you can also build reefs with some man-made sort of concrete structures called reef balls. This one is more of a natural reef of shells and small stone. We also looked at intertidal boulder fields, like the picture shown on the lower right. And then we also considered offshore breakwaters, which is shown on the upper right, for more of reduced wave energy along the shoreline. I think it is really important for everyone to understand that all of these solutions really just reduce wave energy at the shoreline. They do not bring sediment or create sediment for the beach. So in a system that's sediment starved, any one of these solutions would reduce wave energy, but it's not going to bring the beach back. So maybe they would be, performed, something to consider is performing one of these in conjunction with some beach nourishment. So we took the 14 beach areas and we evaluated the applicability of those resiliency alternatives I just showed you for each site. And that evaluation process considered a number of factors: the presence, absence of coastal armoring, the width of the beach, the slope, the elevation, the grain size, whether or not there's nearby sensitive coastal resources. So one thing that's shown on this figure here is these little blue areas, which are areas of rocky intertidal shore, which are sensitive coastal resources that are valuable for marine wildlife and habitat, and they're resources that we need to protect. We also looked at directions of sediment transport. So we did some wave and sediment transport modeling to quantify the dominant directions of sediment transport along the coastline. So we also factored in the results of that modeling into which alternatives are most appropriate for the various sections of beach. And then we obviously evaluated the capacity of those alternatives to reduce storm damage and improve resiliency. Excuse me. This slide here shows an overview of the alternatives we identified for the various sections of beach. In this northern area between the Marshfield Situate town line and very close to the end of Sunrise Beach, we identified beach nourishment and dune nourishment as the most feasible alternatives. Similarly, south of Green Harbor, in the Bay Ave beach area and Gurnet Road beach area, we also identified beach nourishment and dune nourishment as the most appropriate alternatives. In this section in the middle, from Ocean Bluff all the way down to Green Harbor, we identified the range of hybrid alternatives as being the most appropriate in those areas. And again, those could be conducted in conjunction with beach nourishment, but conducted alone, they're not going to bring sand back to the beach, and those seawalls are still going to be subject to the lack of sediment in front of them. From the next few slides, I'm going to go through what those alternatives look like in each of these areas. So this is the Ocean Bluff to Brant Rock area. The figure on the left shows that area with the offshore bathymetry in colors. So you can see in the Ocean Bluff area, we're looking at considering reefs, nearshore boulder field, and possible terracing in front of the seawall. So these are resilient building options that have co-benefits. They provide coastal protection, and they also enhance ecological habitat. The intertidal boulder field would be in water depths about 5 feet or less, whereas the nearshore reefs in water depths between 10 and 15 feet. A little bit further to the north, right here, north of Brant Rock, we're looking at a cobble berm to enhance the existing cobble that's on the beach. This slide just shows conceptually what these alternatives might look like at these locations. You can see the intertidal boulder field here with the offshore reefs and the cobble berm down here. And moving a little bit further south, Brant Rock and south. In this area, we're looking at reefs, offshore boulder field, and terracing. So again, they're resilient building options with co-benefits, built-in water depths anywhere from 5 to about 10, 15 feet. And again, just a conceptual diagram of what those might look like with the boulder field and the shallower water and the offshore reefs out here. So these are alternatives that we feel would be useful in the towns considering further. We will be trying to quantify the benefits of these alternatives in reducing wave overtopping. But it's something that we're going to recommend to the towns that they pursue further and investigate the applicability of these alternatives for these sections of shoreline. The next few slides show the areas where we identified beach and dune nourishment as the most appropriate solution. This slide here is the northern section of beach in Marshfield from Rexhame to Sunrise. We identified 2 separate areas for beach and dune nourishment, one up in the Rexhame public beach area and a little bit further south, and then one that goes from Winslow Beach all the way down to Sunrise. The northern beach section is 2,950 feet long. The southern is just shy of 7,000 feet long. There's a break in the middle of the beach nourishment project at Beetles Rock to protect that rocky intertidal that's shown on the slide on the right, the photograph on the right. The volume of material that we're estimating would be needed for the Rexhame beach areas between 150 to 200,000 cubic yards. And in the Winslow and Sunrise area, that volume is anywhere from 235 to 407,000 cubic yards. One thing I do want to point out with the beach nourishment projects is that These are engineered beach nourishment designs that we're coming up with. So they have specific criteria for the height of the beach, the width and the length, and it's all designed to provide protection for specific storm events. And it's important to draw a distinction between an engineered beach design and a beach nourishment that's constructed as a part of a beneficial reuse project. For example, a project that uses dredged material from a nearby project. So the engineered project is more of a large-scale project, again, that's designed to protect against storm damages. Nourishment that's conducted as part of a beneficial reuse project typically includes smaller volumes of material. And because the smaller volume and shorter length of those beneficial reuse projects, they typically don't last as long as the larger engineered projects. But it's really important to understand that that doesn't mean they're not valuable, these beneficial reuse projects, especially in areas that are sediment starved, like Marshfield and Duxbury. So even though the material from these beneficial reuse projects can migrate longshore to adjacent beaches, there's still a benefit to the overall system because the system's sediment starved and it's providing material to the beach. So it's just important to set the expectations for the public for the two different types of nourishment projects. So it's our hope that this project will be successful in permitting this larger engineered project, and the towns can decide how to fund and move forward with this larger project. But they'd also be in a really good position to accept sediment from other smaller beneficial reuse projects. So the towns could take advantage, for example, of smaller volumes of material from beneficial reuse projects and place the material anywhere in the permitted footprint. They'd be in a much better position if they have the footprints permitted and are ready to accept material from these beneficial reuse projects, while they can also plan for construction of the larger engineered project. This slide shows the beach and dune nourishment adaptation footprint for the area south of Green Harbor. Goes down from just south of Green Harbor to covers the Gurnet Road beach area in Duxbury. This footprint is 5,480 feet long. 74% of that is in Duxbury and 26% is in Marshfield. The volume is anywhere between 310 and 470,000 cubic yards. Okay, one of the other things we're doing for the project is to evaluate for these beach nourishment areas several different designs. And we have 3 alternatives shown here, and they're illustrated on the graphic below. So I'm going to try to walk you through this. So this is a cross section of the beach down at the Bay Ave area. This is elevation, and this is distance. The black line is the existing beach, and this is the seawall right here, this sort of vertical wall right here. So alternative 1 is the smallest, it's this blue line, and it considers a 50-foot wide berm at elevation 6.5 feet, and then a 10-to-1 slope out to the natural beach. Alternative 2 is a 100-foot wide berm, slightly higher at elevation 7.5, again with a 10-to-1 slope out to the natural beach. And then alternative 3 simply includes a small dune in addition to the alternative 2 design. So it's got a dune at the top, and then the berm continues out 100 feet at elevation 7.5, and then slopes down 10-to-1 to the natural beach. So one thing that could kind of put it into perspective. So here's high tide right here, this line. If you continue this over, it hits basically the base of the seawall. So with the smallest alternative, this project would be pushing high tide seaward about 70 feet. So there'd be 70 feet of beach, dry beach at high tide. For the larger project, there'd be about 130 feet of beach above high tide with the project, with alternatives 2 and 3. So it pushes high tide seaward considerably, between 70 and 130 feet. One of the other things we did was we wanted to see, well, how will these beach nourishment projects perform? We have two ways of looking at that. One is we look at the cross shore spread of the material as a result of storms and under just average annual conditions. We use numerical modeling to look at that cross shore transport. This is an example of the results of some of that modeling for that Bay Ave beach south of Green Harbor. We did use a mixed grain size in the modeling, so about 50% sand and 50% gravel. And that actually simulates the existing composition of the beach. We do know that the grain size on these beaches changes daily, weekly, seasonally. So it was a little bit difficult to you can't really pick one composition and run it. So we chose something in the middle, 50% sand, 50% gravel. And again, that simulates roughly what's on the beach at any given time. So this simulation here is a simulation of the 10-year storm at that Bay Ave beach, and I'll walk you through. So this line here, that's the existing beach. So again, this is the seawall where it's vertical here. The blue line is one of the beach nourishment templates. This is the one with the dune, the 100-foot berm at 7.5 and sloping down 10 to 1. And the red line is what happens to that beach profile when it's hit with a 2-day, 10-year storm. And you can see there's erosion and transport of some of this material up here in the upper part of the beach, but it's moved offshore into the nearshore area. And it's a little hard to see from this bar graph here, but we know that after the storm tends to push the coarser material up towards the base of the wall and above the high tide line, and the sandier material gets taken offshore into this nearshore area. So there's this cross-shore transport of the material. We do know from watching these beaches over time too that after these storms, there's recovery of the beaches. So the waves will bring some of this sandier material back up onto the beach, the higher tide beach, and there'll be a recovery of the beach after time. It won't recover exactly to what the template was, but there'll be accretion back up here in the high tide beach. Another thing we did was I talked a little bit about overtopping before. So that's when the waves hit the seawalls and splash over the walls, and that's what causes a lot of the damages to the structures behind the seawalls. So we wanted to see if there would be any benefits from the beach nourishment projects in reducing this wave overtopping. So we compared overtopping with existing conditions and with the nourishment project that I showed on the previous slide. And we did that for both a 10-year storm event and a 50-year storm event. And we saw that there was a 98% reduction in overtopping with the 10-year storm and a 94% reduction with the 50-year storm. Excuse me. This figure on the right shows a table from, or a diagram from the Army Corps of Engineers Shore Protection Manual. And we can focus on the column that's yellow for buildings. And it just quantifies the type of damage that you get with increasing, increasing overtopping rates. So overtopping is on the left, and as you go up, you get more and more overtopping. The red dashed line is the overtopping that we get now with the current situation. So in terms of damage to buildings, it's structural damage. Okay, and that's what we see when the storms come by. With the beach nourishment projects, we get a dramatic decrease in overtopping. That's the green line here. And what this diagram shows is that we have minor damage, fences, posts, and small things. So we're going from structural damage to buildings to minor damage with the project. All right, next steps. This just shows where the study is headed. So we will be continuing with the modeling that we're doing to look at cross-shore transport. One thing I didn't mention is we're also modeling longshore transport. So that will tell us how long the project lasts in terms of percent of fill remaining in the footprint and width of beach, how that changes over time. And it will give some indication of how often the beaches need to be renourished. So we're continuing with that alternatives assessment. We also plan to develop cost information. So we're developing cost information for construction and maintenance. And we'll be comparing those costs to the costs that I showed you earlier regarding existing management of the beach and sort of projecting those out over 30 years so the towns can sort of put it into perspective with what they're already spending. We're also starting the environmental permitting for the beach and dune nourishment projects. With the grant, we are intending to file a permit application with the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act unit, and that will be filed by the end of June. The towns are also considering applying for additional grant funding for the remaining permitting. There's about 5 or 6 additional permits we need after that MEPA permit. So there is the opportunity to apply for that grant funding coming up here the next month or so, and the towns are making decisions now about how to proceed with that. It is important to know that the permitting does take a while, so it's anywhere from 1 to 1.5 years to complete the permitting. There'll also be a lot of public outreach to the property owners. As Michael said at the beginning of this, many of the beach areas are owned privately, and so there is a component of the grant involved with outreach to these public or private property owners to talk about the requirements associated with putting sand on the beaches and granting easements for the towns to do the work. We will be engaging in ongoing public outreach. This is really just the beginning of that process. The town of Marshfield has had CZM grants in the past, and there was public outreach associated with those projects, and we're sort of continuing that work now with this project, and we'll continue it further. There will be additional public meetings and our presentations, and information will be posted on the planning department websites regarding this project. This PowerPoint presentation will be posted on the planning department websites. So, we encourage the public to follow the project and look at those websites frequently. We also encourage them to submit questions and comments to the email addresses shown here. And we hope that you will share the information that you've learned here with your friends and your neighbors. And we encourage you to be engaged in the project. Thank you very much for attending. And I think that concludes the presentation. Unless anybody wants to say anything to conclude, I think that wraps it up.
Leslie?
Yes.
So I've gotten a couple of emails. The first one was from an individual who said, why don't we just let the seawalls die? I would like to say that, and buy out the properties. Buying out the coastal properties are also a very expensive option and currently is well beyond the means of the town of Marshfield to undertake. Currently, there are no federal or state funding programs available for the buying out of homes. Also locally, the selectmen, the general public, and town meeting have not given up or not gotten to the point where they would give up on the seawalls and the properties directly behind them. And even when we locally get to that point, we will need federal assistance in order to move forward on moving back from the coastline. Second email was asking, and maybe you can give us a little more information. I replied to him, but I figured you would be the better person to speak to it. They wanted to know why we were not proposing putting sand in the Ocean Bluff beach area by Hewitt Point and Brant Rock Beach.
Yeah, the reason for that is that it wouldn't last long. The beach is very steep there, and the seawall, wave interaction with the seawall would result in the sand being taken away very quickly. We also have nearby rocky intertidal resources that are there that we need to protect. So it's sort of a combination of factors.
Thanks. That's what I had said to him as well.
Yeah.
I'm all set. Thank you, Leslie.
Okay.
If I could jump in there, the town of Duxbury is in the same situation as the town of Marshfield with respect to Greg's comments. And we are certainly exploring all of our options as a community. We would also need the federal assistance to look at the alternatives of a buyout. I'm encouraging folks, if you want to be on an email outreach list, I'm going to see whether I can create some sort of a subscription to the planning department webpage. I will post that if I am able to do that so that updates are easier to get out to the community. And we want to thank Leslie for her work. I want to thank both the cable TV stations to broadcast cooperatively live, and thank our town administrator and town manager for participating in today's meeting.
Yep. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Leslie. Good seeing everybody.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to conclude the meeting now. Thanks for attending, and we'll hope to hear your comments and questions.